Hello, everyone. This is the chapter 6. This is the chapter 6 review, and this chapter is mainly focused on the middle class and how the middle class has changed over time. In fact, it has shrunk um, over the last 35 to 40 years. And so let's take a look at some of the factors that influence or are present in the life of people who are middle class. I'm going to start here with this slide. Here. The middle class is not homogenous. The middle class is, in fact, like pretty much any group, is very diverse. Right? It's not monolithic. There's really no group that's monolithic, meaning everybody in that group is the same. There's lots of diversity within a group. And so when we look at the middle class, you can really break it down into the middle class who are white collar job holders and blue collar job holders. Here's why. Some of the people who are in the middle class, they are educated. They have a college degree or an AA or some type of certificate that enables them to earn an income that puts them in that range there that you see, the 48,000 to 144,000 for a family of four. They may even have a master's degree. And they typically work in offices, they work for corporations, educational institutions, places such as this. And they're not doing manual labor. It's an office setting, they may have their own office or a cubicle, and they may be fairly highly trained depending upon what they're doing. I would not say, I disagree here with the author of the text, that medical doctors and lawyers are not in the we're not in the middle class. We're typically, many of us are in the upper middle class. And so I disagree with that. But they do, of course, people who are in this white collar job sector do work in either secretarial, managerial, clerk positions, directors. If you think at educational institutions, deans, etc., these are people who often are in that white collar job holder class. The blue collar job holders are generally people who don't have a high school diploma, or if they do, they didn't go beyond that. They are usually doing some sort of manual work, whether that's doing landscaping work or cleaning homes or working in fast food, working in a factory, working on an assembly line, etc. And it is possible, though, for some white collar workers to have lower paying jobs than some blue collar job holders. And that is because some blue collar job workers are people who are unionized. And so they may be electricians who are unionized, plumbers, carpenters. I'm trying to think here of the different unions that I know: pipe fitters, trucking. Usually are people who drive trucks are usually unionized. At least many of them are unionized and are represented by the Teamsters. Recently, Amazon, a warehouse on the East Coast, was unionized by a guy who started his own union. He didn't want to be part of the traditional unions. He started his own. And so, lo and behold, after a couple tries, they actually did vote to unionize, and that may move to another Amazon site in Georgia, where once before the attempt was made to unionize and it didn't happen then, but maybe it'll happen now because it was so close. So there you have the blue collar job holders and the white collar. The upper middle class. Now, these are the people that I would say are the professionals, the doctors, the lawyers, the engineers, the architects, etc. These people typically are fairly highly educated. They typically have some level of training, or they may have had to pass some certification. And lawyers have to pass the bar. Doctors have to pass the medical boards, and architects have to pass a series of tests as well to be certified to practice architecture in their state. And so we're talking about people who've spent quite a bit of time becoming educated and perhaps, depending upon the family situation, have taken on some loans, maybe not. But these are people who typically like their jobs more than people who are in the lower middle class. Some middle-class employees are not all that happy with their jobs, and you might have heard about the Great Resignation. That is what the media has dubbed the occurrence during the years of latter part of 2020, all the way through early part of this year, where we've seen quite a few people who maybe given time off from their jobs because of COVID, or who, because of the behavior of customers and clients during the worst part of the pandemic, they were really badly abused by clients and customers. And so some people have resigned. They've decided, life was worth more than just working at a job I really dislike. And let me see if I can do something different with my time. And so that Great Resignation, as it's been dubbed, is one example of what happens when people realize, there's got to be more to life than just working in a job that I really don't like. And we've even seen that some people who we would think got into the type of job they have because they want to help people, because they want to serve their communities. Even some of them have left their jobs because they've become dissatisfied with the working conditions, with the parameters of how they have to do their job. And so police officers, nurses, teachers are just some of the what we might call paraprofessionals who have left their jobs and started doing something else, or maybe moved to another country, etc. Intersectionality, we discuss more in chapter 10, but intersectionality is a term that Kimberly Crenshaw, who I believe I mentioned before, was my professor at my criminal law professor at UCLA Law School. She's credited with creating this term called intersectionality. It's really this idea that we all, as individuals, have many different identities. And those identities are intersectional. They intersect, and we can't necessarily untangle them one from the other. So that as a brown woman, if someone asks me what's my most important identity, being brown or being a woman, I can't say either one, because both of those are so very fundamental to my identity. That's one example of intersectionality. And of course, who we are and the characteristics that are part of our intersectionality can influence the kind of experiences we have within the society that we're living in. The other thing about social class is that families and education are a huge, huge influence, particularly in our early lives, from birth going all the way through adolescence. Families start to become a little less important for a lot of us, not for all, but for a lot of us when we get to the latter part of middle school or early high school. But for those formative years, from birth to about 12, 13, our families are a huge influence on us. And of course, who our families are, what kind of social class they come from, what kind of education our parents have, what kind of community we live in, what type of school we go to, etc. All of those things are, again, intersectional parts of our identities and our experiences. And of course, we may be more advantaged or disadvantaged depending upon what type of, as Dew puts it, human ecology we have around us. The human ecology, this idea that kind of similar to the natural ecology around us, the earth, the air, the water, the land, etc., that all these things are working in harmony. Well, if we think about human ecology, it's the same idea. This idea that all of these different social institutions that surround us and that we're part of while we are growing up and developing, and even as we continue through our lives, all of these are part of that human ecology that surrounds us, that influence us, and we have experiences as a result of that human ecology. So one study that I thought was quite interesting pointed out something about functional literacy, and Dew references this in the text. Functional literacy is this idea that a person has the ability to understand and use basic reading, math, and is able to interpret documents in work situations, right? And is able to attain technological skills as they become available. So that means, for example, that somebody who, say, was working in an office in the late 1980s, who had functional literacy, would have been able to learn how to use the new technology that was coming into offices by the mid 1990s. Computers, some software packages, Microsoft Word, for example, Excel, PowerPoint, etc. Someone with functional literacy would be able to learn these things as they become available. But you have to have that functional literacy to be able to do that. You've got to be able to at least be able to analyze information, which is what interpreting documents means, and being able to read at a level that is at least 8th grade or above, and again, do math that at least is at 8th grade or above. If you don't have that functional literacy, you are unlikely to be able to obtain a job working in an office or working beyond, say, a receptionist level. The ecology of class. I misspoke. Duke calls it the ecology of class. And I definitely think that this is something that is hugely important in terms of what kind of a life experience we will have. It doesn't mean that it is the end all and be all, that we can't change the ecology of class. Of course we can. But it may be more difficult than for some of us to change our ecology of class than it is for others who are maybe born into a different, more affluent ecology of class to begin with. So I want you to think about a community, whatever community. Think about your community. Think about the community you grew up in. Think about what kind of home you lived in, whether it was an apartment or a condo or a townhouse or a single family home. Think about the kind of schools you went to, from kindergarten all the way through high school. Think about whether you think or you believe that these provided a quality education to you and fully prepared you to go on to college if that's what you wanted to do right out of high school. Think about what kind of parks or other recreational activities were available in your community. Think about what kind of, how many churches there were in your community versus how many liquor stores there might have been in your community, how many supermarkets there were in your community versus how many corner little stores that mostly sell, the basics, bread, butter, cheese, eggs, and lots of alcohol and fat, snacks, corner liquor stores, essentially. I want you to consider, did you have a lot of billboards around you in your community, or did you have very few billboards around you in your community, or did you have none? And I'm asking these questions because communities, whether or not we realize it, have some influence on how we think about where we live and how we feel about where we live. For example, if you drive through Beverly Hills, you will not see one billboard anywhere on any of those streets. But if you drive in the east side of LA, around, City Terrace, Lincoln Heights, Boyle Heights, etc., you're going to see a shitload of billboards. And a lot of them are advertising fast food or alcohol or the California lottery or, any number of things. But when you live in more affluent areas, billboards are not allowed. Why? Because they're unsightly. But in lower income communities, they need the revenue, the tax revenue, and so they'll allow billboards to be placed all around the community because the city gets some money, or the landowner who owns the property gets some money from renting out the land as a place to put a billboard. Also want you to think about how many hospitals were around your area. If you live on the east side of LA, the biggest hospital there is County USC. Why? Because it serves mostly people who are underinsured or uninsured. And if you go over to the west side, you're going to see Cedars-Sinai, which is a very well-known hospital where lots of celebrities receive treatment, but it also costs more to go there. And it's where the more affluent people live and are more likely to go there. So again, just thinking about that ecology of class, that whole environment of our social class that surrounds us. And there are different types of ways that parents will rear their children. Three very well-known ones. They are the authoritarian style, the permissive style, and the authoritative style. The authoritarian style is when parents make the rules and they strictly enforce them. And it's my way or the highway, or my way or you get the beating, depending upon the parent. There's no room for a child to ask questions or to disagree. That is not tolerated. The permissive parents are on the other end of the spectrum. They're 180 degrees away from that. These are the parents who say, well, you know, I don't want to be mean to my kid, and I want to be my kid's best friend. And so I'd rather, you know, drink with my kid than have my kid go drink with the friends, or I'd rather do, you know, smoke pot with my kid than have my kid go smoke pot with their friend. I want to be the best friend of my kid. And so they let their children do pretty much whatever they want. And then there are the authoritative parents. And these are the parents that are in the middle. They're the parents who set those rules and guidelines and expect the child to adhere to them. However, if and when the child does not, these are the parents who, like the Brady Bunch, I always wondered who had these kind of parents. I marveled at this as a kid at 8 or 9 years of age watching the Brady Bunch, because the parents, even when the kids fucked up, they said, come on, let's talk about this. And these are the kind of parents who will listen to the child. They'll ask questions. Why did you do that? What did you think was going to happen? How did you feel? How did the other person feel? And they'll ask that child to work through with them so that they can understand why the child did what they did. Doesn't mean they're going to support it or allow it to go unpunished, but they will at least allow the child some input to tell it from their side of the story, tell their side of the story. And I remember one student in particular, and she was, by the way, not a student she was at East LA College. She was one of my students at East LA College. This was years ago. She said that she had 3 daughters, and whenever they had done something that, you know, they got in trouble, were going to get in trouble for, she'd ask them to go to their room and write out their explanation of why they did what they did and explain it from their perspective. Just write it out. You know, it didn't have to be perfect, but just tell me in your own words what happened, why you did it, what you thought was going to happen, how you felt, and then tell me what you think should be your punishment. After the child wrote it out, she'd read it, they'd talk about it, and sometimes the child actually had come up with what she considered to be a fair punishment, other times not. But she said that it allowed a couple things. Number one, it allowed her to calm herself down and, you know, not be so hot under the collar about what happened. And number two, it enabled her daughter to tell her side of the story in her own words, to take her time doing that. And as she's writing, she's processing what happened. And then they can both sit down and have a conversation that didn't involve any yelling or blaming, didn't get heated, but at least the child felt as though she was heard. She said, you know, my daughters were not perfect at all, but I found that this really worked. And some of the other students thought, oh, she's making this up. But I don't think she was. I really do not think she was. I think she just had either read somewhere or on her own figured out that this might be a good way for both she and the child to calm down, to really have some time to think, and then when they were ready to come back and have that discussion. Helicopter parents, I'm sure you've heard this term. Probably 15, 20 years ago was when I first started hearing the term helicopter parents. These are people who really want their child to succeed, and so they will micromanage the child's life. They will sign the child up for certain sports or other cultural activities, things like piano lessons or art lessons or, you know, ballet, etc. Sports teams, sports camps in the summer, science camp, whatever. These are parents who really want their children to succeed. they may even view their child's success as their own success. And so they become very involved. And the unfortunate thing is these parents continue this into to the point where the child's now applying for college and they're writing the college essays, or at the very least they are reading them and correcting them and suggesting things that should be added. And it may even follow in the child into graduate school. On occasion, not many times, but on occasion, I have, as an instructor, not at community colleges, but at the University of Laverne over the last, I don't know, I've been there since 2013, January, but a couple times I can remember a parent reaching out to me on behalf of their child, a student in my class, and asking about what they could do to improve, or could they get extra credit or something to that effect. And of course, as an instructor, unless that child is under 18, I am not obligated to talk to the parent about the student's grades. So I kindly tell them that, and then I think they go to the dean and get the same answer, and then they finally go away. But those are examples of helicopter parents. Okay, so now human capital and social capital. And let's start with human capital. Human capital is the idea that we all have a certain set of skills and abilities that are just inherent in us. And for middle class parents, they are really focused on trying to develop as highly as possible whatever skills and abilities we may have. And so, of course, that means that if we show an early promise with math, middle class parents will often enroll the child in a program that is focused on math. Or if a child shows some early ability playing, I don't know, soccer or baseball or something, the parents will really focus on helping that child to develop those abilities to the highest degree possible. It also means, of course, that some of these individuals are parents who will really focus on the discipline needed to help their children to excel at the highest levels, in whether that's in that math or the piano playing or the sport. They'll also make sure that the child has access to as many educational resources as possible. If the child needs a computer, they often have the disposable income and will buy the child a computer. If the child really is interested in science, they have the capital, the income that they can send that child to a summer camp on science or math or sports or whatever. That's the human capital that we all have, but middle class parents are really focused on trying to develop their children's skills and abilities to the highest degree possible. And that's not necessarily true of lower middle income and working class parents or poor parents. And it's not because the parents don't think their children are great and wonderful. Of course, most of those parents do too. It's just that they're more focused on trying to provide the basic necessities for their children, and they often don't have the disposable income or even the knowledge about programs or other resources in the community that could provide that ability for the child to really reach their full human potential. So social capital, we've talked about this before, that capital, that social capital is this, or maybe not before, it's maybe a different class, but social capital is all the things that are available to someone because of their status. And so a very easy example is, let's pretend that I have a daughter who's a junior in college. She wants to go to law school, or so she thinks. And so I use my connections. I call colleagues, I call friends who are lawyers, and I ask, hey, my daughter would like to do an internship. Does your law firm hire interns? Do they use them during the summer? It's okay if it's not paid. She just really wants to get the experience of being in a law office. And lo and behold, I'm able, through my connections, to get my daughter that internship. or to get my son or daughter a job for the summer working in someone else's newspaper office or something like that. That's the kind of social capital that parents can use to enable their children to have access to resources and opportunities that parents who are not in the middle class, that parents who are lower middle income and poor and working class, they just don't have those connections. They don't have that social capital. And then finally, cultural capital. Cultural capital is all of the things about how we live and what we do, how we dress, how we speak. All of that's part of our cultural capital. And of course, because our society is largely focused on middle class norms and values, if you know how to speak like the middle class, dress like the middle class, act like the middle class, you have more cultural capital than people who don't know how to do those things. So that means that middle class parents, they teach their children how to communicate effectively. They teach their children how to make decisions for themselves. They teach their children how to make friends, how to network with other children, if you will. And lower income and working class parents don't generally do that. And again, it's not because they don't want to help their children. They just don't understand that that's an important piece of a child's development, is learning how to navigate all the different social environments. An example from my own experience is this. As a kid, particularly K through 6, actually really 2nd through 6, throughout the year, there'd be a handful of slumber parties. That's what they used to be called. I'm not sure what they call them today, but slumber parties. It was a birthday party for a girl who invited a number of other girls to her home, and you got there around, I don't know, 5 or 6, depending upon the time of year, and you hung out all night, and you had food and told scary stories, and you stayed up as late as you could, and the next morning you ate some breakfast and you went home. A slumber party. Well, every now and then I'd actually get invited to one, and I could never go. Never once got to go to a slumber party. The reason was that my mother said I had no reason to go and sleep at someone else's home when I had a home and I had a bed in that home. And she never let us go, because in her immigrant Mexican mind, you don't let your kid go and sleep in a stranger's house for the night. That's not going to happen. You know, you might go and sleep at your cousin's house, or your tia or tia's house, tia or tio's house, or your grandma and grandpa's house. But you're not going to go sleep in a stranger's house, and I don't know their parents. I don't know what they do. That's just not going to happen. No reason you need to do that. So my parents didn't understand that part of middle class culture. They lacked that cultural capital, and therefore I didn't have the opportunity to go to these slumber parties. I heard about how fun they were, though. All right, let's see. Okay, I want to go here. Part of being in the middle class workforce is you need to have that cultural and that cultural capital. You need to know how middle class organizations work. So certainly you need to have the education so you can have a job in one of these places. These places often require you to be perceived as a hard worker, whether or not you're actually a hard worker, but just being perceived as a hard worker. You also have to have a lot of self-control, right? You got to hide your feelings. You can't show how you really feel. You may really dislike the person in the office across from you, but you don't say anything. You don't say anything about that. You just smile every morning and say, hey, how's it going? Yeah, good. Oh, how was your weekend? Okay, good. Yeah, cool. I know this because I did this for years. When I was working full-time as a full-time tenured instructor for East LA College. I didn't like everybody in my department, but I never told them that. I just go in every morning and say the same thing, whether I like people or not. Hey, good morning. How's it going? Good, right? Or, hey, how was lunch? Yeah, great. Okay. You know, it doesn't take much to be cordial, but it will definitely work against you if you don't have that type of self-control. Also, if you are in a workplace that is focused on clients and profit, etc., then you may have to sell a certain number of widgets or lots or whatever it might be. I was in education, so we didn't have to do that part, but we certainly were expected to contribute to the campus community by being on different committees and working as a member of that committee. You've got to be a team player, right? Which means, as I said before, you've got to have that self-control. You don't like somebody, doesn't mean you're going to say it, doesn't mean you're a liar, it just means you're surviving in that middle-class workforce. And if you are ambitious, then you can be ambitious, don't show it too much, right? You've got to appear to be a pleasant, non-threatening person, and that's especially important if you are a woman, and particularly more so if you are a woman of color. I cannot tell you how many times I've been called a bitch by white males throughout my various careers. I've had 3 different careers, and that name has been applied to me quite often. And maybe I am a bitch, I don't know. I just know that it's applied to me quite often. And then, of course, if you have someone who is at a much higher level than you are, who takes an interest in your career, who can perhaps help you to navigate the road to promotions and the upper echelon of that organization, then you certainly will be better for it. And then one of the things that I've mentioned before is that outsourcing of work, so that instead of having people answer calls here in the US, it's people in India or the Philippines or somewhere else answering calls. But another thing that has occurred more frequently is the temporary work. People who are working temporarily, maybe a 3 or 6 month contract, and then something even more recently than that, probably in the last 15 years or so, what we call the gig economy or gig work. That is when you download an app and you work for Instacart, or you work for Lyft or Uber or DoorDash or Grubhub. These are all considered gig economy jobs, meaning that these are all fueled through technology because you download the app, you sign up to work for this organization, and you really never even have to go through a job interview in most instances. And they just do a background check, make sure that you haven't murdered anybody, and you start working. And you decide when you work. You decide your hours, you decide the days, you decide how many hours you want to work. Of course, gig work doesn't come with benefits, it doesn't come with overtime, it doesn't come with disability pay, doesn't come with all those things. So you do give some things up for the freedom to work independently and decide for yourself when you want to work and how much you want to work. All right, that's it for chapter 6.